it. We now invite our discussant, Shri Vinod Aggarwal, former Additional Chief Secretary of Telangana and former Chair of the Conclusive Titling Committee of the Niti Aayog. With his extensive experience in land policy reforms, Mr. Aggarwal will offer his reflections on today's themes and provide insights from his extensive work in land governance. Sir.
Good evening, everybody. ILDC every year gives an occasion to all of us to remember the great person, Dr. Huck. And what else, a better way to remember him than the Huck Memorial Lecture, which the ILDC has started. I should compliment and congratulate Pranab and Ali in this entire team, not only for organizing ILDC, but also more importantly, giving an opportunity to remember Dr. Huck. I shared many dreams with Dr. Huck, along with Pranab and other people also. Some of them remain to be still acted upon. Hopefully, in coming years, we will try to do that. We had a very long association, very symbiotic relationship between us. Whenever he needed some support, he would rely on me, and whenever I needed support more than him, I relied on him and than anybody else. And he was always available, very affably, very willingly, voluntarily. He was always available to offer whatever he could do for any support. We worked together on several committees on the Niti Aayog, on DOLR, and also outside. Land leasing laws, land titling laws, land policy document for the Government of India, etc., etc. We really miss him. And when we wanted to have a greater play through ILDC and through other means, he left us all of a sudden. It's a loss which cannot be met again. My homage to him once again through these words. Today's memorial lecture has been a very significant one. Dr. Gautam Bhan, who has got a very great understanding of the problem of the urban housing, has put it in so succinctly here. I don't think that it can be done in a very better manner. Very simply, very clearly, very vividly, he has mentioned in three simple things. That's affordability, adequacy, and viability. And he has gone ahead to explain what is affordability, what is adequacy, and what is viability. What are the various segments, what are the various requirements of it. I'm sure that if you read this book, all this will be covered by this, something more will get out of it. But after going through this presentation and the lecture, I personally feel the need for reading the book is no longer exists for me, perhaps. It is so well covered. It's also it gives a lot of information, a lot of knowledge and insights into the problem that we face today. It's an eye-opener to see that 80% of the urban population doesn't get covered by the affordability of the housing. Not to talk about the 80% is a big number. And we are talking about 2.5 crores houses to be built, or 3 crores houses to be built in the next 5 years or 7 years. I don't know how we will find the land to build these houses. Where will we find the land to build the houses? And if we find the land also, will it be meeting the requirement of the viability? Of course, adequacy, etc. can be taken care of, but how do you make it viable? The important aspect he has underlined already in his presentation is that a housing needs to be very close to the place of work, because people come to the urban cities from rural area to find work, to find livelihood. And if they cannot live near the place of work, then perhaps the cost of living goes very high. And the time they spend on the commutation to the workplace of work from place of living, apart from the money, makes their life quite miserable. I live in Hyderabad in a colony of the officers, which is very close to the posh colony of Jubilee Hills in Hyderabad. Jubilee Hills is supposed to be the colony of residential area of Hyderabad. I live close to that. Just 7 years back, I moved there. We could get a domestic help for about 6,000, 7,000 rupees a month there, who could do some household assistance cleaning, etc., etc. Now, within 6-7 years, it has become about 15,000 we are asking. Why is such a high cost increasing? When I realized that most of the people who come to work in our houses, who do the domestic help, they are depending upon a particular basti there. They call it basti, where the rooms, a simple room of 10 by 10 size or maybe a little less than that, used to be for 3,000 rupees. Now it is not available for less than 7,000, 8,000 rupees. The housing for them is available. Now suppose if he gets 15,000 also and spends 7,000 rupees on a housing rent, then what is that left out for him to feed for 3 members in the family? So that's a very important thing. But he has also pointed out that rental value, we are talking about building the new houses, but we are not talking about regulating the rental value of the residential houses which are available. He has mentioned that this not only rent required to be regulated, but also is required to be supported by the government policies. How do they support, how do they regulate is again a very big question, and these are left unanswered. Maybe some other time, somewhere else, we'll have to deal with them properly. Right now, I do not see any policy initiative directed towards understanding this particular issue and addressing it. One suggestion he made, very valid and valuable suggestion, was to make reservations. I remember some 20-30 years ago, there used to be reservation in any housing, any colony being developed. There used to be certain percentage of land or certain percentage of units to be built for economically weaker section housings. But those things were mostly observed in violation, or people found out some other escape routes to circumvent them, and finally it was given up. I don't know what's happening to that. And we also should realize, like they say, that it is necessary that people who are weak are taken care of, so that the strong people, or I can use the correct words, people who are poor are taken care of well, so that the people who are rich can survive well. So it is also necessary that for the life to be comfortable for the people who can afford a good housing, it should be supported by housing, a proper, adequate and viable housing for the people who support these services for all the rest of the population. That's also important. Dr. Gautam Bhan has very clearly, very adequately has underlined all the aspects of this problem. My compliments to his paper, to him, and it's a very valuable presentation he has made here. I wish that this can be converted into some sort of a recommendations and sent to policymakers. Perhaps this may have some impact somewhere, and then the effort is worthwhile. And use planning also he has mentioned about it. Unfortunately, in India, we have no land use monitoring and planning. Land is the only resource which is limited. All other resources are unlimited. Land is only the resource which is limited. You cannot have, if the population grows or requirement grows, you cannot have more lands unless you go and occupy new territories, which is highly unlikely. So how the land is being used, how the land is not being used, there is no proper system of monitoring towards it. I remember some time back, GIZ had tried to do something on the land usage monitoring and a policy, land usage policy, but nothing came out of it. He has quite rightly pointed out that the land usage has to be monitored properly, so that much part of the unutilized or ill-utilized land could be diverted towards the affordable housing, make it viable. He also talked about the right to adequate housing committee, its report paper. It was an eye-opener. Many of us are not aware of that. Such a thing existed that today. It's good that it has been made known to us, and perhaps some effort should be taken to bring this exercise to a proper conclusion, to its proper conclusion. Coming to Ms. Shilpa Kumar's presentation, it was also a very good presentation, no less befitting to the occasion. She has talked about the framework for the spectrum of the movable property, interaction of individual and property, She also talked about the socio-economic identity. The property is not only a means of providing financial security or something, it's also an important aspect for the providing socio-economic identity for the people. She talked about the global shift that we are using the collecting effort of the government, civil society, etc. How efforts are going on towards trying to sort out the issue of the urban housing, the continuous movement in the cities, and its impact on the climate, or the vice versa. She has also beautifully brought out in her paper. When the disaster or the climate change takes place, it affects, mostly affects the weaker sections, or the people who do not have adequacy of the houses. They are mostly affected. And when the cities grow, when the urban areas grow unplanned and unregulated manner, that also adds to the climate disaster. We see many of the cities, a little bit of rain and the cities get flooded because no proper planning is done for the waterways. Waterways gets covered by the houses or maybe some occupation, unauthorized occupation, etc. So similarly, construction activity, how does it contribute to the climate change, the cement production, steel usage, how much percentage it adds to it? She has very well brought out in her paper. Another aspect she has mentioned about it is that the advocacy and services, housing is not only the houses by itself, but the supporting services of the housing also are very important. She has underlined this thing. She also suggested that certain of the capital pools which are untapped, like CSR, etc., which can be tapped into it. Lastly, she also mentioned about a research work their organization has taken up with the collaboration of the IIT Bombay, where the living lab has been created at Gandhi Dham, where involvement of local organizations is there, so that the proper studies can be done and proper solutions can be found out. At the end, she emphasized that ultimately it is the communities which have to be driving down the proper housing and our urban development projects, but it requires collaborations of all the important players, this thing. With these two papers, I feel that this memorial lecture has been quite good today. It has been useful and successful for us. I'm sure that we will take home quite a very few useful inputs with us, and which will be useful in the future course of action. Thank you very much for that.